will start sharing my screen. Let me know once you start seeing, and recording is started. All right. So coming to your question, Rupesh. First of all, everyone, Rupesh has joined us today. He's already working with. He is already working, and he has some questions which he wanted to clarify, and which is certainly in the scope of every one of us to understand, because it's the question is coming directly from the industry, and then we also understand so that uh, we can prepare ourselves accordingly. So his first question was like, we read data, and when we read data and create data frame, then how we can make it more optimized, make it more multi-threaded, or etc etc, when we read and when we write. That was your question, Rupesh, right?
Yes, Keshav. So when you load the data to the data frames, how do you make it faster? For example, it might be a JSON file, and when you write it to any data, I mean any S3 bucket or any place you want to optimize it. Yeah.
Okay. So to answer this, I will. It will be a good revision for everyone, because we have discussed this from all the perspectives. See, there's two thing in computing. Now, if this is a computer, we get the what we get is the virtual CPU these days, because all the technically on your laptop you will see CPU, but when you go to the cloud or when you work on the EC2 or virtualized environment, you get the vCPU, virtual CPU. But technically it's a compute processing unit, and then what you get is you get the memory. That's the two thing you get. Now what is this thread, and what do we mean when we say we want to do multi-process and etc etc, multi-threading concepts, parallelizing, optimizing, concurrency, etc. All these are concepts which is very important from the interview perspective, and you have to answer in a very crisp way. Okay, so thread and process first we understand. We have understood this in our earlier session, and I hope that would be recorded as well, but we'll repeat it. So first, thread. Thread never has its own memory. Thread is a uh, like if we talk about JVM, JVM is a process. Okay, because when you run a Java code, Java, if this was your computer, this was my computer. So if your computer had 16 GB of RAM, you have given, let's say, 8 GB to Java to work on. So when you run Java, there will be a process which will be running, and then when you will run your when you will submit your jar, or when you will run your program, that will be called as a thread. Now that's a one thread which is doing one operation. If there is a opportunity that you are doing you are reading a common resource, or you are reading a multiple resource, you can parallelize it, that one thread will read this and another thread will read this at the parallel time. So you will achieve the parallel computation frequency. That's a core idea. Remember, during the Hadoop introduction, we parallel computing and etc. We saw that parallel computing gives you a parallelization on the available memory of your computer. So if 16 GB was the total allocated memory, let's say your one program is taking 2 GB, you have 8 GB, so you can create up to 4 threads, and that can run parallel, and you'll get the parallel computation. So if processing this data was taking 1 minute, in 1 minute itself you can process similar 4 files. If you do it serially, you will take 4 minutes. If you parallelize it, if you do it multi-threaded way, it will take it will get completed in 1 minute itself, right? This is called multi-threading, but this thread is utilizing your JVM memory. It doesn't has its own memory. Like when I open an Excel, for example, when I open an Excel is a program. The moment I open an Excel, this is an analogy also you can understand. Let's say I open an Excel. What will happen on my task manager? There will be a Excel start running, which will start taking some memory. Okay, some memory has been allocated to this, but when I do some operation on this, that will be a thread. That is a task. That I'm doing in this allocated memory of this one. If let's say if this computation keeps growing, it will keep demanding more memory from my computer. But the thing is, this process has demanded will demand the memory on behalf of the thread. So now in terms of data frame, what happens? The question was we have, let's say the question he had is we had 1 GB of file. For simplicity, we are taking 1 GB, and we read using Spark or PySpark. But what we create, or I will also I will come to pandas, but let's just first target Spark. So when we use these libraries, what we create, when this could be CSV or let's say JSON, anything. When you read this, what you create, you create data frame. You write here code df dot read CSV and pass the location of this read underscore CSV and pass the location of this path. Internally, what will happen? Your Spark master will read the metadata of this file, get the property. It will see that this is a 1 GB file, and in your Spark conf, you have a property to set your partition size. Partition size. Let's say you have partition size, like as I said earlier, partition size in Spark varies from 128 MB till 2 GB. Okay, in this range. So you can set something in this range. Let's say I have set it to, for simplicity, I'll set it to 200 MB. So when my Spark master, this is a master node. Master node, when I have created a session, the master node will df.read CSV operation will check the size of this file, 1 GB, 1 GB. Each partition is of 200 MB. So for the simplicity, I'll keep 5 executors. It will create 5 partition of this 1 GB file, 200 each, and distribute it to 5 partitions of. Let's use, okay, if I use it, so it will these are the 5 executor the Spark cluster had. It has distributed 200 MB file. It just randomly split this file into 200 MB of each partition and sent to each node. This also has 200 MB. This also has 200 MB. All these has 200 MB files. Okay. Now Spark has, you have submitted the Spark job. Spark job created stages, and stages got further divided into the task. Task is nothing but a thread. In simple term, a basic computation unit. So basic computation unit, why I'm saying is multiple tasks will be created to process this file. So you in Spark, you are already leveraging the multi-threading aspect. Your data got partitioned, your multiple tasks will be created, and each task will be allocated 200 MB of the data. And let's say if this cluster has 4 GB of memory, so it will utilize 4 GB of memory and one. So each task, number of tasks is technically depend on the number of cores what you have. So let's say if this machine had 2 cores, it can 2 CPU, it can have 2 tasks. But right now you have created you have created two. First, in first case you have created 200 MB of partitions. So only one task will pick 200 MB. One CPU it will take, and memory is fine. 200 MB is fitting, so no problem. This calculation will happen. Any issue? Let's say if processing this has taken, let's say 1 minute, 1 minute, 1 minute, 1 minute, 1 minute. In 5 minutes, it will process the 5 GB of files. So that will be the efficiency of this cluster. It's a multi-threaded, well distributed, horizontally distributed. Read is optimized. Now let's say the situation can be worse. Now let's say you had 4 GB each. So 4 into 5, 20 GB. You are reading 100 GB of file. In that case, the further optimization will be needed, right? The master will see, okay, I have only 20 GB of total execution capability, but I have to process 100 GB of file, and my partition size is 200 MB. So it will create how many tasks? It will run in iterations. First, it will compute the 101 GB, or let's say it will increase the partition size. Let's see the possibility first. Each executor had 2 CPUs, so it can run 2 thread. 2 thread, one thread can take 2 GB. So 2 thread can be running here. 2 thread, 2 GB each. So if I will just increase the partition size to 2 GB, because partition size can be increased up to 2 GB, right? Now see, on this executor, in a minute, 4 GB data will be processed. Is that making sense? Because it had 2 CPU, so 2 thread can run. Each thread will take 2 GB, and because each thread will take 2 GB because you have decided the partition size of 2 GB. So thread takes the data, which is a partition, and takes 1 CPU available on your executor. So if your executor had 4 CPU, you could have run 1 GB partition size of 4 executor, and you are parallelizing your threads. Rupesh, here is the answer. By changing this, you are parallelly. In the larger data set, you had 2 options. Let's say now from 2 GB, I'm increasing it to 4 CPU. So you could run 4 threads here, right? But your partition size is, if the partition size is 2 GB, then 4 core won't be utilized. Your 2 core will remain because idle. So your executor is not running on the optimized in an optimized way. So what you have to decide, you have to check the number of available cores, and based on the number of available cores, you have to tweak your partition size, and you have to understand the total size of the data what you are reading. So if these 3 knobs are well tuned, then you will get the multi-threading benefit.
Yeah.
And there is nothing on top of this additionally. See, Spark is internally multi-threaded, so you cannot put extra multi-thread on top of this.
Got it.
Okay, now go ahead.
So what is the industry norm? Should we do it dynamically I mean, when we read the data frame, we check for what size is the data frame. Depending on that, you can change the number of partitions, because you cannot change the cores when you start I mean, the number of CPUs per executor. So I think we can check what is the size of the partition. Depending on that, we can change the partition size.
Yeah. Okay. So now that is correct. You I said 3 knobs, but this knob you can't change. This is fixed, right?
Yeah.
Number of core is fixed. Earlier version of Spark didn't have the dynamic memory allocation and dynamic tuning of all this. Now these days it's all dynamic. Even the partition size are dynamically decided in Spark 3. Okay, so latest version of the Spark dynamically decides it. That's why the question comes in your interview. And what people prefer to say, if you Google and then you get the answer that I will enable the dynamic allocation, and the interviewer will be like pissed off. No, I don't mean that. I mean how internally you will handle it. So earlier, this was the process what people used to do. Adjust the partition size so that your code is optimally utilized. Now I'll tell you one more problem that could happen. Let's say over here you are just reading a file. Reading a file is it's a lazy operation, right? It hasn't done anything. You have performed some action as well, filtered it,
Yeah.
etc., etc., etc. Now you are writing it. When you are writing it, you have done a heavy computation. Sometime one core will not be enough to process this. Let's say in one core you have given 2 GB of data, and you are doing the heavy processing. So one processing needs compute CPU, and data has to fit in the memory. So if you have a heavy computation, you are doing like join, you are doing like aggregation, you are doing some heavy operation, then you need more cores as well per thread.
Yeah.
Okay. So in that case, what you will have to do,
Yes, we can't hear you.
Keshav, are you there?
Keshav, I think we lost connection. Keshav.
Yeah, we might reconnect, I guess. Yeah. We can message him.
hello.
Hey, Keshav.
Yeah, I was like because of internet dropped off. But you heard me till that point, right? That if it's a heavy computation, then the exercise becomes different.
Yeah, if there's, it could be the other way too, right, Keshav? If there's, because we do a lot of transformations too. Once you do the transformation, size also will increase or decrease. It might.
Yeah. So if you're doing heavy transformation, in that case, you have to ensure that you leave all the cores open. And if your thread will demand for more code for the processing, then it will get it. Ideally, task initially takes one core, but if it demand for another core and another core is not available, then it will go stuck. But if the core is available, then it will be given to it. That's called the hyper threading. I mean, internally, you in your laptop, you know, right? If there is another processor is not taking, and if you have 7 core CPU, your computer will run fast. All the program will run fast. And if no programming is running, maybe your one Excel can also run on 7 CPU. So that's the idea.
Yeah.
But you have to leave those cores. You have to ensure that those cores are available. Okay. Now this was from the read perspective. These kind of optimization. When it comes to the write, read and write both are expensive operation. When you are writing, you have to ensure that your data is well coalesced. Okay, so I'll again come to this point. Let's say now your processing is done, and your data is now available on, let's say in this you had two threads running on this, and two data set has been created, and on this as well you had two data sets. On this also you had two data sets. You have now 10 data sets to be written on the disk. So what is suggested, if your process data, if all these process data size, let's say you read 1 GB of file, okay, and after reading 1 GB of file, you have calculated that September month, September, and the volume is 20. I mean, let's say sale is like 20 CR, and this 20 CR is like distributed across all of them. What I'm trying to say is a small data set you need to write. So if your 5 thread will go and write this simple data on the disk, it will take 5 times. I mean, it will take what can I say? It's better that what you do, you coalesce these files. What I mean by coalesce, you merge these files and then just let one thread write it. If one thread will write, that will be more fast and optimized, because one operation is happening, one ops per second, or do whatever is the processing capability of your uh, master node, then that will be utilized on your HDFS. So during the write, you have two options. First is, if this is a large data set and can't fit on your master, then you will try to coalesce this on the same executor, like merge this. Coalesce means you are merging two files on the same executors. Okay, and the merge means you are bringing everything to the master and then merging it. So one big fat file is created and that will be written. So what is easier? Easier if if your process data is less, then just write it, merge everything and write it once. If your process data set is heavy, try to coalesce it on the individual executor and then minimize the number of threads. If your data set is very high, too high, in that case you just let write every bit of this partition. So you instead of 5, you will have 10 threads writing onto the disk parallelly. So
That's
this is
what
how
I'm
the
actually
write operation
doing.
gets parallelized.
That's what we're actually trying to do. We are doing it right now. Okay, so I just wanted to ask, since, for example, if you write it, it becomes too many files, right? For example, you have 120 records or 120 million records or something like that, and if you're writing it parallelly, you can write it like what, 100 files, 200 files, and simultaneously faster. So I just wanted to ask, is that the right way to do it, or coalescing it and writing it in one single thread is the right way, because right now it's like 5 GB or 10 GB. Sometimes it's going to go to 20 GB of data too.
So you can you can take this a call based on the data set what you are writing. Okay, now this depends on you said a volume like 120 million file, 120 million rows, or something like 120 GB. Okay, now this 120 GB you have to you can, let's say, if you are writing 1 GB of each file, it will be I'll take a couple of examples. It will be 120 threads will be writing to the disk. You that's and definitely you I mean you're not working with the 120 executors. Let's say you have 120 GB data set is split into how many executors? Let's say X number of executors. And this X number of executors, you see this data set, can this be partitioned or bucketed? If this can be partitioned and bucketed, then shuffle this data again on the on this, or let's say if month wise, if you're saying that if month wise I will split this 120 GB can be very well 12 GB of 10 partitions, so only 10 thread will be needed, and next time my read will also be good. That's another option which you can do before writing. So if you have identified that month can be a write factor or year can be a write factor, then you partition it on your transform data. The data which you're trying to write, you just partition it on that column, shuffle it again. That data will be further distributed on those executors and then write it. That's one way. Second way is uh, so many thread is not good. Less number of thread is also not good. You have to find the right mixture. I mean, right aggregation of too less and too high number of threads. So 120 GB you are trying to write, you make sure that it's well partitioned while you're writing it onto the disk. Or if you're trying to just let's say not taking a chance seeing the data and understanding the data and not taking all those pain, then at executor level just coalesce it and then write it. So if you have, let's say, if you have X number of executors, you will have X number of threads writing to the disk.
Okay, got it.
So that is also optimized. But before writing, I mean 120 threads writing to the disk doesn't make sense. It will take a concurrency hit on your, because you know, on your HDFS also it won't be so optimized to take 120 requests and writing on one single node, because when you write onto the HDFS, it also creates a replica and etc. So multiple threads can choke the system. Try to find a right mix of it, and finding the right number is by doing before writing, take again partition your data, shuffle it. Shuffle will again happen in memory and then write it, or else collage it executor wise and then write it. Those are the 2-3 options.
Got it, Chris.
All right. I hope this was useful for others as well, because partitioning and shuffling we have seen in the last class. Right, Tina and others?
Yeah, Keshav.
Okay, so now I'll come to today's agenda. Today's agenda, which I think from the last class pending was like, so we talked about partitioning a lot. If I will bring that up, partitioning. So in last class, we saw all these partitioning problem, this data set, how many executor, how many CPU, what's the size of the data, and what to do with this optimization and all. I hope you all can recall this. If not, today we have discussed just now. And what was pending from last class was the shuffling. So Tuina wanted to see this hands-on, which we will see. So I have it noted. But for the shuffling, which again I'll say three things, that shuffling is a costly operation. Again, it takes time. So normally we try to avoid it. We try to shuffle with the less data. So for you, it's good, Rupesh, because it's a process data. So process data is technically we assume that it's lesser than what we have read. But if it's higher than what we have read, avoid shuffling again. And then remove the data skewness. Skewness, by skewness I mean the same thing. If your data salting and you introduce the composite key, and then what I said here is that you introduce the partitioning here at this layer. Where did that go? You introduce the partitioning at this layer before writing it. Okay, so that you will remove the skewness. So let's say if this executor has out of 120 GB, let's say this executor itself has 60 GB, or let's say whatever the 20 GB was the allocated, this executor has 20 GB, and this executor has only 2 GB. Just for the sake I'm saying. So if this is the case, this thread might get finished fast, and if somebody is reading it parallelly, might read the incorrect data. So avoid all those problems. Try to remove the skewness before writing data as well.
Sure.
These three things in terms of the skewness, these are the common three thumb rule which you have to take care. All right, now today's agenda is data lake. We'll see the data lake concept. Then I will also talk about data lake, because this is these days this is a very buzzword. You get to hear a lot from top-notch people talking about why data lake, why not you're talking about data lake, let's have data lake, etc. Or if you're not hearing it now, maybe in couple of days you start hearing those concepts. So first we'll talk about data lake. We'll see. I mean, I have kept something ready which I could show you on Google Cloud, and I will also show you on AWS and Azure the parallel implementation of the data lake, so that it would be a sort of hands-on and conceptual as well. So before I start with my concept, I would like to let's hear from Rupesh what problem is facing related to data lake. So tell me, Rupesh.
Sure, Keshav. So we are trying to implement the data lake in our environment, where we have mainframe, and the mainframe data is being replicated to the data lake landing page first using a third-party tool. So overnight, all the data comes in and lands into landing basically. Then they want us to transform the data in the landing through raw. When I say landing and raw, these are the two different buckets, S3 buckets that we're implementing in AWS. So it's like a blobs of storage, S3 buckets. So once we process the data and they have to do some analysis, they are using the Tableau for it. The transformation is basically done by Lambda, which is a serverless technology, and AWS Glue, which creates catalog based, if you point to any of the data. So the glue is pointed to landing right now. So the process goes, once the data is in landing from mainframes, you transform the data using Lambda and Glue to get the data into raw, and from raw you pick it up and do some Tableau analysis and send the reports overnight. This is supposed to be a batch file, batch processing. So every single day, Lambda is triggered using control M jobs. Control M jobs are basically a workflow jobs where you have, if you have heard about Airflow, so similar to Airflow. Yeah.
Perfect. So yeah, I mean, this is how, in fact, I will start as well. So good. So we'll see this problem statement. To summarize this, you have the existing setup where you have the data in the mainframe. Then from the mainframe, since you cannot pull because mainframe has a different data format, patented data format. So there's a utility which converts it into the human readable format, something called CSV, JSON, and etc. So you have there will be mainframe, then there will be utility, then you will generate that file, and then you will bring it to the S3. That's how it works. Okay, so I'll take the same example, and we'll talk about data lake. So I have the PPTs as well. Before we'll go to the PPT, let's see it here. So
Keshav, your screen is, I can't see your screen. Frozen.
it's frozen. I'll reshare it just a minute. Do you see it now?
Not yet. Yeah, now.
Okay. So data lake. Okay. Technically, I will start with my same statements that what I say is that every enterprise, like let's say you are working with an organization, or what name any whatsoever organization, everybody has data. In some has in RDBMS, some has in mainframe. Banking has it mostly in the mainframe, or the large organization has in the mainframe, like insurance firm, booking firms, banking. Others has in the RDBMS. Some has in Excel. Some has in Salesforce, like sales teams data. Some has in CRM. Some has in ERP. There could be, I mean, see, from IT industry is running from so many days, right? Let's say HR department has the data in the ERP. Sales team data has the data in the Salesforce. There is a accounts department who is just dealing in the Excel. Customer relationship, new customer, and etc. Those data are coming in the CRM, and then your transactional data, your app, and etc. is coming to your RDBMS, which is MySQL or Oracle or Postgre, anything. So these are the variety of sources, right? And it could be one organization as well. Even in one organization, all of this can exist. So what is the problem? Problem is, let's say you have the data in the sales and data in the marketing. So let's say marketing team maintains the customer relationship. So marketing team has the CRM DB, sales team has the sales DB, Salesforce database. HR has the ERP database. Now HR, or if your C-suite person wants to see some sort of common report, you will have to ask this guy, give me the marketing data, give me the sales data, give me this data, give me this data, etc., etc. Diversity. This was a diversity, right? So it was a problem it was a problem. No, this is still a problem in every industry, that they have multiple database. Sometimes the person or the C2 also doesn't know how many databases do I have in my organization, and if this database anybody is using, or is it just sitting idle, even if it's being used by any application, or was that a legacy application thrown out, end of life, end of sale. Do we need it? Do we want to trash it, or we want to just keep it because of some contract, etc., blah 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 blah, problems in every industry. So first, understand the problem. uh, Industry has the data, but it is of no use, because one person wants to know everything. He will never get the idea of uh, what all data his enterprise has. So the concept came that we will create a data lake enterprise wide. We will create a storage tier. Earlier it was not possible because distributed file system was not there, right? DFS has become a game challenger. And I haven't mentioned HDFS. HDFS was from the Hadoop. But DFS is a game changer, distributed file system. Earlier it was the file system, that's why you had multiple. Mainframe was saying I can process faster, and some team needed the fast processing, so you went with the mainframe. Some few team needed, okay, no, I can live with the delay and etc. I just maintain the data. So enterprise said, let's do one thing. Whatever data my enterprise has, let's say the enterprise name is let's say Amazon, for simplicity, so that nobody can take the blame. Let's say Amazon says the I have buyers data, I have sellers data, I have my own data, I have my AWS cloud data, I have my Prime data, music data. All those data are sitting in a different DB. Let's bring them all together at one place. So the first thing will start that bring this data also here, this data also here, this data also here, this data also here.
Keshav, you're not audible.
Azure blob storage. I'm not audible.
Your voice is breaking.
Yeah, and the screen is also stuck. Sorry, Keshav.
Yeah, you can see my screen, right?
Yes.
It's mine is frozen.
Let's try it again. So let me know if I'm still breaking. But first of all, can you see my screen?
Yes, Keshav, now you are audible and not breaking.
Now I am audible. Okay. So the problem was clear. The solutioning was clear. Solutioning was like industry started thinking of that. Let's bring all the data to a storage tier, distributed storage tier, distributed file system, and it could be of these types: HDFS, S3 from Amazon, Google storage from Google, and blob storage from Azure. There are others as well, like you will hear the name ADFS, Azure Distributed File System, You will also hear name like DBFS, Databricks file system. So all these file systems are like distributed file system, and data lake can be created on top of it. Okay. So this is the idea of data lake. Let's bring all the data to a common point. But there could be a problem. Mainframe format was different, Salesforce was different, different frequency, different variety, different format. How could I bring them? So now the question will become complicated. So now let's see the complexity behind it. So let's say we have mainframe. Okay. Let's say we have CRM. Let's say we have RDBMS. Sorry, I put you on mute. This. Can you go on mute? Yeah. Unmute yourself if you have to ask question. Okay, so I'm setting up the variety of data set. 3 kind of data set. I'll also put one API based. Let's say somehow some guy is also consuming, let's say the how is this bird? Twitter. You are also consuming data from, let's say, Twitter or some social media. Okay. So he mentioned that this data comes nightly. Every night we have to load the data from the mainframe. Let's assume mainframe format .c format or .p format, whatever format it was, got converted into .csv. So over here we have the CSV files. Okay. Over here we have the JSON file. And over here this is, let's say we are MySQL or Oracle, anything. I mean, just imagine it's RDBMS. You can name it anything. I am mentioning on behalf of all Oracle. You can also put NoSQL here. You can also this CRM. Let's say your CRM is based on MongoDB, and MongoDB is a JSON-based DB, so it's a perfect example, right? So you have this variety of data sources, and from RDBMS, what happens in the table? Data is RDBMS support insert, update, and delete, all those operations, right? So your data is continuously changing. So let's say this JSON data should be batch. I mean, this is also, let's say, what I can say. Let's say I will put it hourly frequency. This is hourly. RDBMS, I will put it as CDC. That you want to bring as soon as the change has happened. And the Twitter is a real time. Let's say you have to consume it the moment somebody tweets. Let's say you're doing some sentiment analysis and blah blah and etc. Am I audible and screen is visible? Hello?
Yeah, Keshav, you're audible.
Yeah. Okay. So this was a API. Twitter exposed
Keshav,
Twitter.
I
I've
think
named
your
it, but you can
screen is
maybe.
frozen, Keshav.
Should I move to? But if I'll move over there, I won't be able to. Mouse might not work. Just give me 1 minute. Let me move somewhere closer. Let me switch somewhere closer to the router. I hope it should be better now. Yeah. Let's see observe it for a few minutes, and then we'll see what can. I mean, if it's working better or not. Sure. All right. So these are the technically you could have a legacy data source. This is legacy could be anything. It could be SAP, it could be mainframe, it could be some sort of blah blah blah. You could have NoSQL, you could have SQL-based DB, and you could have API. These are the common ways of data sources. So these are the data sources you could possibly have in your organization. Okay. Now the idea is you want to create a data lake. Oh, before this, we need to understand that how this will come. Okay. So for this is clear. Over here I've written the frequencies as well, different. So this is not lightly, this is nightly frequency. Sorry, this is running every night, this is running every hour, this is running this is CDC. So the moment the data is changing here, insert, update, or delete is happening, the CRUD operation on SQL DB, you are doing the change data capture. Remember, very important point from the understanding and the crux of the data lake. How will you do the CDC? Okay. So, and what is CDC? CDC is change data capture. RDBMS is backing your. This is also called transactional DB, online transactional DB, OLTP, transactional processing. So this is backing your portal. Let's say Facebook portal, where everything is user is updating his profile and etc. But the moment he update his profile, that data comes to here. So here you will have user DB, and the user has changed his address. So address will get updated. that address change should go into the data lake, right? So let's say, let's put data lake here. But how these things will come? So over here for CDC, you will
Keshav, I think your screen is frozen. Am I the one who's experiencing this?
address, but yeah, let me reshare it. What else? Can you see it now? This is what I had lastly drawn. That's all. Can you see it now?
No.
Still no.
Okay, sure. Now, yes.
Yeah, now yes, yeah.
But still there's a huge lag, I'm saying. Okay. CDC, but you were able to hear me, right? When I was saying that this is backing the your online
Yeah, I was able
application
to
and
hear
you're
you.
making changes and that data needs to be captured. So over here you need a CDC mechanism. Now CDC mechanism can be done by I'll just list out some names. So okay, let's say Divisium. This is one open source CDC library which can help you read the bin log or read all the transaction and immediately brings it to the data lake. So Divisium can help. In AWS, we have called DMS. Okay, DMS, data migration service, can help you bring everything to the data lake. So you will run the DMS service, you will specify what table you need to read, and that table will be continuously in sync with your so let's say over here you had few tables. These few tables will be continuously in sync using the DMS, this technology. Okay, Divisium you can use in Google, you can use in AWS, you can use in Azure, in anywhere against the MySQL and PostgreSQL databases. CDC can happen in other ways as well. That I'll come to later. The landing and the base and the raw silver, bronze, silver, and golden tier, etc. Staging, base, and data mart, etc. There are multiple ways to achieve. This is one of the simplest way I'm saying here. Okay. Now for this mainframe data, this is a nightly job. So you have written a ETL job. So what could happen here? You could write a ETL job. Why I'm saying ETL? You will extract from, you will read the CSV file and write it into the S3. So at this end you will have CSV connector. At this end you will have S3 connector. Let's say your data lake is based on S3, and this can be your normal Python job. Pandas based, depends on the daily volume. Let's say if daily CSV file is of up to GB, you can write pandas. If it's a heavy file, every night, if it's generating like 100 GB, 200 GB of file, you can write PySpark. If not, then you can use some ETL tools as well, like Azure Data Factory or AWS Glue or EMR, etc. So you can use other ETL tools. Similarly, you can use ETL here. Depends on the volume. Over here, this end you will have the JSON connector, and this end you will have the S3 connector. If you want, you can club them together as well. This ETL can be clubbed, and two jobs will be running I mean, you can create one Spark job as well. You can create two Spark job as well. One Spark job you will schedule through cron or through Airflow or through any orchestration tool to run nightly, and one job you will schedule to run hourly. So this job will be continuously running every hour to bring the data from CRM to S3. And this job will run every night to bring the data to the S3. This will be continuously in sync. Now, real-time data. For real-time data, what you will use something like messaging queue, and for that what we have is called Kafka. Okay, now Kafka is open source. Again, over here you will get lots of choices. From AWS you can use Kinesis. From Azure you can use Event Hub. From Google you can use PubSub. So these are what? These are message queue. We call it message queue, distributed messages queue. Kafka, Kinesis, Event Hub, PubSub, all these things, anything you can use to consume the real-time data and bring it to the data lake. So your real-time data is coming over here. So this part is complete. From source, you have applied the transformations. Transformation could be of these many types: scheduled job, CDC job, real-time job. Three kinds of job. Scheduled jobs can be your normal ETL, can be written in PySpark, can be written in Hive, can be written in any ETL tools like Azure Data Factory or Google Data Stream, or sorry, Google Data Flow, or it can be written in AWS Glue. You can use you have variety of tools to do the ETL these days. Leave all those Talend and etc. On cloud stack itself, you have multiple choices. Clear so far? Any question till this point? No. Okay. So what has happened here? We have brought the same data to this layer. The idea is in data lake. Data lake was the solution for what? That centralized access of all the data what the enterprise has. Enterprise had data in the variety of data sources. Let's bring them all together to one common place. So we have brought them all at a common place. Now the format of this data could be the same. So this data is CSV, or if you have stored on the S3, maybe you have stored it as S3 as a blob, but it's a CSV file. It's a JSON. It's on the S3 blob in a JSON format. This is also coming as a tabular structure in a CSV format on S3 bucket. So over here also this is CSV. This Kafka is also coming as a CSV. If you want, you can bring Kafka service to S3, or you can directly consume this as well, because it's a real-time operation, right? Real-time you want, so you can directly bring it to the processing layer, your PySpark, and then return the result. And you can also persist it in. See, it has to go to the data lake, because the concept is all the data has to come to the data lake. But we for real time we don't have to also compromise the latency. So Kafka will have two flow. Persistence will go in the S3, and processing will go into your real time PySpark or Kafka processing, or anything, whatever Kinesis processing or whatever processing you are doing. So this will be your consumer. You will have after Kafka, you will always have consumer. Okay. So now the data has come to your layer, and if this CSV had 10 columns, technically you will keep all those 10 columns here. You will not drop any columns. Some of So not some of the time, but now this is also important for you to understand that for tracking purpose, what data you are bringing, because you will continuously bring data and dump it here. So what you will do, you will add 2-3 columns to this. You will add column called created date. On what date that particular data has come to this system. Active, whether this data is active or inactive. Let's say if data has been deleted here, so you'll set the flag of this data to false or true or false. You'll introduce 2 column here, and you'll also introduce a row ID at some common unique identifier. I'm saying so 3. So in data lake, every data the data if source had the 10 columns, over here you will have 10 plus 3 for your maintainability perspective. Apart from that, no other transformation you will be doing in this ETL. It will be straightforward one-to-one mapping in the data lake. Clear so far?
Yes, Keshav.
Okay. Now I will move to data lake afterwards. So this thing also we will see it how it can be done in different way. But so right now, remember Divisium and AWS DMS can help you bring the relational data set to the data lake. Remember real-time data, Kafka, and all these solutions in ETL, and as it is data, only couple of changes, and this is how is implemented in your system. So you can even in the next implementation of yours or during interviews, you can briefly summarize in this way. Perfect. Now let's now we have our stuff in the data lake. Let's say we have created our data lake on S3, or we have created on, let's say, Google Storage. For simplicity, I'm saying you have all the let's say this was one bucket, this was second bucket, this was third bucket, and you had all the data set here. This was fourth bucket, and you had all the data set. So once the data has come here, then what will you do? Then the processing layer will come, right? You'll have to do some processing, because finally your output is what? Your output is either you want to do the reporting.
Keshav?
Or ML.
Yes.
Yes. Are you writing something on the screen? Oh, it's freezing.
Yeah. What happened to the screen today? Should I just I'll reset it again.
Okay.
Why it's freezing so many times today? Okay. So let me know if you can see now. I've reset.
Not at Keshav.
I'll join back then. What else I can do? Let me join back. shared. Okay. Still not visible?
Yeah, we could see now.
Visible now. Yeah.
You can see now, right? Okay. So you got the data on your data lake, raw data. Technically, we call this as a raw data, okay? Because we didn't do any transformation. What we had in the system, we just brought it as it is. We tried to bring everything over here, and then at the other side, we had the requirements that some team wants to do the machine learning, some team wants to do the reporting, some team, and then there is a portal on which is people wants to see the operational data, like HR wants to see. Again, we brought the ERP data as well on the data lake, right? So HR will want to see the employees details. Marketing team will want to see the customer informations, and etc. etc. Right? So we need some sort of processing layer here. Okay. Now in this processing layer, there could be again couple of things. These days, it's pretty much simplified using the Databricks. Okay, you could have a Databricks layer here. You could install the Databricks. You could have the EMR. You could have the Azure Synapse. And Synapse was earlier known as DWH or something, or it was ADF. Sorry, ADF is still there, but yeah, let's keep it ADF. Azure
Is
Data
it similar?
Factory.
Oh yeah. Is it similar to EMR, right?
No, Azure Data Factory is a pure ETL tool. EMR and Databricks is Spark clusters. Okay. Okay. So no, I'll show you. I'll show you the EMR. I'll log into the EMR and I'll show you. Databricks. We have seen, right? Databricks. You set up the Spark cluster. I think Databricks we have tried a lot. By the time it's taking time, let's continue. Otherwise, um, we'll see that tomorrow as well. On EMR, you can set up the Hive cluster. You can set up the Spark cluster, both. You have both the option. You can set up the normal Hadoop and MapReduce cluster as well. EMR is Elastic MapReduce. You normally set up a Hadoop cluster. Databricks is a very sophisticated Spark processing engine. Synapse and ADF is a ETL tool. You do like earlier days, you had the source, you had the target, you map it, and it can do the big data processing and everything. So Spark is separate, but ADF in itself can also do the big data processing. So ADF is a on cloud solution of SSIS. If you guys remember, if you want to know, SSIS was the ETL tool from Microsoft from age old. I mean, let's say this was the ETL tool from Microsoft since the beginning. But on the cloud, they have SSIS got renamed as Azure Data Factory. But anyways, At the processing layer, you would have all these, you can use all these technologies. In Databricks, you can write, what you can have, you can have the notebook based, code writing pattern. You could have Python, Scala, PySpark, R, Java. You could write anything. So normally over here you are doing the processing. After processing, what you are doing, technically you would be creating data warehouse here. I should not have made it so small. You are creating data warehouse here. Data warehouse means now you are giving a shape to these. Let's go this way. Okay. So now this was a raw layer. I'll call it as a raw. From the raw, what you will do, you will create multiple schemas. Let's say now you will de-synergize the thing. You'll this layer, some people call it silver layer, some people call it process layer, some people call it base layer, different names. Okay, but ideally this raw data, you are doing some sort of processing in this layer. You are de-synergizing it. You are again making your mainframe data over here, silver data over here, or machine learning data, feature engineering data over here, and etc. etc. You are again splitting it, and then you are identifying what is needed for the reporting, and you will create a data warehouse. In data warehouse, you remember this that star model. You had the fact table, you had the multiple dimensions, and this type of shapes you try to give, and you create your data warehouse. So, and this layer people call it data mart. Okay, this is how typically everything works. Now let's say ML can directly use the notebook. That's one way, and read the raw data. Let's say number two, can do the notebook based feature engineering and train the model and run the ML engineering. Or ML can read the data from silver layer as well. ML can read the data from data warehouse as well if it needs some process data. Okay, portal will read data from, again, a warehouse, or it can also read data from this base layer. Or you if needed, you can also create another layer which is called presentation layer for your portal, which would have just simple views. Like on UI, normally works better with the view and etc. So you create view, or you create some simplified tables in silver layer, and your portal will work against it. Your reporting layer will always work against the warehouse. Okay, so this is the entire engineering and the purpose end to end, from the source till ETL ingestion. So what we have seen source, we have seen ingestion, we have seen data lake, we have seen processing, we have seen processing two layers, silver and data warehouse, and we have seen the consumers, I mean consumptions or exposure. This is data visualization layer, or whatever name you want to give. This is the final layer for you. This is the end result of any application. So now ask question. Otherwise, I can just quickly show you something on Google, and then we'll continue on this tomorrow.
So should we plan for the future when we choose the ETL tool, because right now they're using AWS Glue and Lambda, which has limitations. So how do I ask them, like, what questions should I ask them to make sure that we are in the right direction of what kind of ETL tools we choose?
Okay, so the thing is, they are on AWS, right? AWS, they have the choice of EMR. They have the choice of AWS Databricks as well. AWS Databricks is a costliest affair. Lambda was the cheapest. Lambda is a serverless and won't support a very high volume. It gives the very worst throughput. Lambda is technically what we will talk about later, because Lambda is not a dedicated capacity. Well, what is happening? You have written a Python code, okay, and you are running on your local. So or let's say you turned off your laptop. Your job will not be running, right? Your Python job is killed. So if you have scheduled any job to run hourly, how will it run? I mean, on what machine? Let's say you have also taken a EC2 instance on AWS. That EC2 instance has gone down. Technically, it doesn't go down. But EC2 instance is also costly than Lambda. So if you take EC2 instance, one EC2 instance, and you'll run one Python job there is a possibility that if somebody shuts down that EC2 instance, or if somebody if that machine itself, it's 99.97% of availability, and then AWS also says that it might go down. The load balancing is needed. That my idea is towards that. If you are using your own compute, then load balancing will be needed. It will not be automatically scaled. So let's say if you have written a Python job, and that Python job is today running on Python is what? Python memory management is completely different.
Yes.
Python memory management is if your current machine has 16 GB of memory, your Python job, Pandas job can crunch 16 GB of data. But if tomorrow the data size is increased, then your job might fail, even if you are running on the EC2. So in that case, scalability is needed. Based on the volume or concurrency and the demand of your job, you need the scalable solution, which should not go down. It should be load balanced. So in terms of load balancing, scaling, and auto scaling, if you have all these requirements at a small level of code, then Lambda is the best choice, because Lambda is serverless. What I'm saying is Lambda is for example, if you go to the West US AWS server farm data center, you'll see acres of land has lots of computer connected with each other. That's called server farm. All those computers commonly create a pool of billions of CPU and billions of GB of RAM. On that billion of CPUs and billions of, believe me, it's literally billions of CPU. It's a 1,000 acres of land which has just computers, and those many CPUs are created. So when you say a Lambda, your Lambda is running in that region. It could be running on any computer, and it can on a given day it can take a billion of CPU as well. But if let's say on that day nobody is using Lambda in that region, so you never know your job is running on what computer and where, how many memory and what compute it is using. Lambda will only encapsulate that I will let your job run. I will not let it fail. But I will never let it fail, but it can run. It can be the case that it is running slow, because let's say on a given date, billions of CPU is already utilized. Your job will be waiting in the queue. Something gets freed, and then your job will be running. But these things AWS will ensure. That is Lambda. It is that is called the serverless means there is a server, but you don't have the access, so you are less. You cannot access those servers where
Yes.
your job is running. That means the serverless.
Yeah.
And
I think
that's yeah. Sorry.
Yeah, sorry. I think I'll ask them, their scalability and their future data growth, what kind of data they are accessing and how frequently the data is going to change exponentially or how it is. And then depending on that, I'll give them options. And because the other departments, they've already implemented the data lake, and the data lake has issues with scalability. So they are moving out of Lambda and fleet of Lambdas to Spark, that is EMR. So I'll
Right.
recommend them and I'll see what they'll do.
No, exactly. So now I'll tell you that now I'm coming to this. So this serverless is called shared capacity, right? You are sharing you're sharing a huge pool of billions of CPU, and you're sharing that capacity with billions of, maybe thousands of users as well. Thousands of other different companies are running their Lambda also on that region. Okay, so it's a shared capacity. Now, when you know your data volume has grown to a level, and you know that the projection is in the next 5 years, this could be up to a few terabyte. In that case, the running it on the shared capacity is like wearing the wrong shoe, because it will never work. What you need is a dedicated capacity. You always need these many servers to be running only for you. So what you will do, you will spawn an EMR. EMR will have these many number of master nodes, these many number of worker nodes, and every worker node will have these many CPUs, these many, this size of the memory. And on that your job would be running all the time, so you can manage your performance. And then the scalability also can be handled. I mean, let's say if tomorrow your job has your data size has increased, so you can also increase your dedicated capacity. But the difference is between Lambda and the EMR is the shared capacity versus the dedicated capacity. In EMR or Databricks, you get a dedicated capacity, dedicated processing, and that is only meant for you. So that would certainly be helpful in the long run. So in Lambda is useful if you are doing some small bit of quick to do POC and quick to lift and shift stuff. Like you have read something or you have written somewhere. But if you're doing some heavy processing, and you know that I have to do this as long as this project lives, it's a long time scope. It's a this is my core work. You need Databricks, you need the EMR, you need the ADF, you need some compute processing ETL engine, you need Synapse, you need Dataflow, something like that, or a Spark cluster, or Spark cluster on Google. So okay, but I think the Databricks should be up. See, this is Databricks. Okay, I'll go to the compute. I'll say create cluster. So I'll just provide a name. And what this is saying, see, this is creating a Databricks cluster of which has Spark and Scala installed. Availability zone, I can select in which availability zone, and it will create a one driver, because this is community, this is free, right? if I would have enterprise one, then I can set the number of workers I want, but by default it's for free. It is giving me 15 GB of memory and 2 core, and I can create the cluster. So in this availability zone, this is also a server farm. I have got a dedicated capacity now of this size. So that's the benefit of Databricks. That's the benefit of EMR. Now in Databricks, you are seeing, I'm only seeing this Spark scale option. In EMR, you will also see the Hive, MapReduce, and other options. Clear? So it's creating my cluster. All right. Now let's just give you a quick gist of console Google Cloud. Okay, so this is Google Cloud Platform. Now on this, also a couple of things from the data lake perspective. So the first thing is PubSub, I mentioned earlier. So this is a PubSub. This is like Kafka. You can create topic, and on that topic, messages keeps coming in. So let's say if I'll put 30 days, I should pick some latest topic on which. So see, during these days, it is a Kafka on which you publish your message, and you can see your messages. If it's not been read, and it will be there on the queue. Otherwise, if the consumer has already read it, then okay, the consumer has already read it. So what is happening from the date from in this diagram? I'll go to the previous diagram. So I'm showing I'm at I am at this point. Let's say I was reading from MySQL DB. Divisium job was running, and Divisium job was publishing the data to the Google PubSub over here on this topic, and from there it was going to the Google storage. So this flow was the screen which we are seeing is like, let's say I had MySQL DB, and from MySQL DB I was running the Divisium connector. Divisium is what? Divisium is producer over here. From this producer, it was coming to the Google PubSub. And this SQL DB has had tables like one table of size 400 GB and etc. etc. So it was a huge cluster of MySQL. From PubSub, we are pushing the data to the Google storage. That is the data lake, Google storage. So you have seen PubSub. Now we will see the data lake. We'll go to the Google storage. And say these are the buckets which we have created. So if I'll go to the Asia South, staging.